Hey peeps, it's Tripl-L, and now it's time for the 7 Deadly Sins, chapter 195, The Battle for Leon's concludes. I think that was the chapter title. No, let's just get right into this chapter, because let me tell you guys, actually, I think this was excellent. I love this chapter, because of the things that went out in this chapter. My gosh, man. I'm very interested in where this author might take this, because this is just very good. Okay, so you guys read the chapter, you know the gist of it. It's pretty much Meliodas going in and killing Fraudrin, and it's just the way that things edged out here. There's a few elements that are very important. One is Fraudrin's general demeanor by the end of this chapter. The second element is everyone who's watching this situation unfold. And the third element is Meliodas and just his general kind of cold-heartedness at this point. Really, if you look at Meliodas in this chapter, and there was even one panel where he seems to have a really demonic smile. It's during one of the panels where he's just making a slash at Fraudrin or pushing Fraudrin aside. Meliodas' depiction in this chapter is sure to raise eyebrows, and even seeing Bond's general reaction throughout the chapter, if you look at the panels where Bond is, it's only his face, it's just the smaller panels. I think there's about 3, and it's just a slow progression from happy to to okay, I'm not sure how I feel about this, and it's just very interesting. So let's actually talk about Fraudrin, because Fraudrin had his important moment, and in this chapter there were a lot of lines that were said specifically to bring attention to his heart in the matter. So Fraudrin makes a sacrifice. He pretty much gives up on destroying stuff once Griamore gets involved. And really, during that segment where Griamore did cover Fraudrin in his barrier, the line where Fraudrin's telling Griamore to be a good boy and stop, that was very telling. That was a very interesting choice of the kind of feeling that should have conveyed. And Griamore aside, Griamore going in there and trying to stop Fraudrin, that's just Griamore being a kid and wanting to protect his dad. That's not important. What's actually important is that Fraudrin stopped because of Griamore. Now, the thing to understand, and that I think a lot of people did kind of clue into this, is that Fraudrin did end up having some kind of attachment to both Dreyfus and Griamore. It's very hard to tell how much control Fraudrin kind of exercised on Dreyfus at all times. I still think Dreyfus had enough will throughout his time. It's just sometimes maybe Fraudrin kicked in to make sure certain things happened. But I do think Dreyfus did have some amount of sense. So it was Fraudrin effectively overshadowing Dreyfus, and pretty much every time that Fraudrin and Dreyfus were together with Griamore, Fraudrin watched those interactions. He pretty much raised Griamore as well, or was there for the whole raising process. And throughout the chapter, we do have those important moments in those lines. The first moment was seeing Gowther during his 10 Commandments days. That was pretty cool. Seeing Gowther in that kind of place is very cool. And Gowther talking about love, naturally. But Fraudrin there, it established that flashback was important to establish this idea about Meliodas going after someone, and because he loved them, or he loved her. It's most likely Elizabeth's previous incarnation. So apologies for the mix up there. It's a lot of things I have to keep in mind here. So that moment establishes a concept that we should attach to Fraudrin. Later on, Veronica goes out of her way to call Fraudrin a heartless monster. That line is there specifically to make a big comparison with the end of this chapter, because at the end of the chapter that line is false, but that line being there just brings attention that we should be looking at Fraudrin's intentions by the end of the chapter. And naturally, the end of the chapter, it concludes the flashback by saying that Fraudrin did not want to understand the concept of love, implying that over time, especially with Griamore, Fraudrin ended up very much caring for the boy. And when it became only Griamore getting hurt and not everyone else, that kind of outweighed his pride as a demon. So what I think is very interesting is that I think the best way to say this, had this been the Naruto manga, that act of redemption right there, where Fraudrin decided to not fight anymore, that would have been enough for Naruto. But this isn't Naruto, this is the Seven Deadly Sins, and this is Meliodas. And now, effectively at this point, when you have characters like Merlin, when you have a character like Escanor, and now when you have a character like Meliodas, the 10 Commandments are plebs. The 10 Commandments are irrelevant at this point. Escanor can wipe out the majority of the 10 Commandments even when the sun isn't up, if he considers Merlin. Merlin just wants to fuck around with every one of them, right? Like Merlin, she doesn't care anymore. She remembered that, oh yeah, I have a natural resistance to you guys, so suck it. And then Meliodas is just like, guys, I was the boss, back off, I can kill you whenever I want. And now it's just like, I've decided that's what I'm gonna do. So when you have those three characters, the 10 Commandments become very irrelevant. But when you look at what's happening with Meliodas, and Bon is the one who's kind of expressing this, because Merlin's still being kind of neutral about all of it, you end up having a situation where, or there's a possibility that it might turn into an angle of the 7 deadly sins versus Meliodas, or just the kind of moral dilemma that's going to be presented in this case. Because if you look at the way Fraudrin died, and then if you consider the way that Montspiet and Derriere previously died, things aren't, it's painting a really bad picture for Meliodas in terms of his current morals, because the villains are being given a slightly more sympathetic deaths. Because if you consider Montspiet and Derriere, they had the thing about lost children being established as part of their characters, and what is possibly their death now. When they died in each other's embrace. Like Montspiet was hugging onto Derriere, and that's the moment they died. Fraudrin died after pretty much putting down his weapons after surrendering. And, we have to consider, yeah, technically these guys are evil characters. They're definitely antagonistic, but I don't think anyone's coming out of this with clean hands. I think everyone is compromised in this particular situation. Meliodas is compromised. He was a demon. He probably killed hundreds of thousands of people and goddesses. The goddesses are quickly becoming like the absolute bitches of the world, and the demons, like, they have their natural diet. They like human souls, like, so naturally they have preyed upon a lot of innocent people, most likely. But it's just it's the characterization of Meliodas, because it's all kind of centering about Meliodas since he's the one that's been killing them. It's going to be very interesting to see how the more human characters of the sins themselves kind of deal with Meliodas, or how they make peace with what Meliodas is kind of approaching situations. So that'll be more interesting, because we already know that King has some problems with Meliodas. We don't know if that plotline is going to be pretty much fixed. And the big question is how Elizabeth is going to end up feeling about the way Meliodas is acting. I mean, for Meliodas, it makes sense. He doesn't want to lose Elizabeth again, so there's no point in him holding back on people who used to be his friends. Regardless, it's a very nice chapter just because of the potential of pretty much examining Meliodas' character. And I'm very interested in what Bon is going to do, because I think Bon is the one that has a bit emotional stake, and he's strong enough to be able to do something about it. Merlin might just kind of back off and just watch this happen. Regardless, it's a very strong chapter. Like, my god, I gotta tell you guys, I love it. I even love that color page with Merlin just in her gold bikini. Like, my god. Let's see, are there any other really strong moments in this chapter? It was pretty much watching Meliodas take down Fraudrin, and Fraudrin getting a slightly redeeming moment. I don't want to make it sound as if I'm sad that Fraudrin died. It's just the way this is. It's very easy to make Meliodas look like the more antagonistic one. And mind you, seeing Meliodas be so proactive about eliminating enemies is pretty refreshing. Like, that's pretty refreshing. It's just, I'm much more interested in how the characters who are his friends are going to deal with this kind of change in personality. Anyway, guys, like I said before, I very much love this chapter. Thanks for pretty much sticking through and listening to this. I found this chapter very interesting, and I very much like the 7 Deadly Sins for presenting these kind of interesting character dynamics. Anyway, peeps, till next time, let's end it there. I really do hope you have an excellent day.